My name is Brianna Cox, and my presentation is on how to reduce the risk and effects of water-lead poisoning in children under 6 years old. My audience is directed towards the parents of younger children. Lead is a natural metal that is found within the ground. Lead poisoning is a health issue that is mentioned, however, rarely is discussed in detail as to the severity of an issue it is, especially for children under 6 years old. 500,000 children in the United States have tested positive for lead. Even though lead poisoning is preventable, the difficulty occurs when an entire community's water supply is contaminated, as in the incident that occurred in Flint, Michigan. The Flint water source, where more than 100,000 residents reside, became contaminated when the water source changed from Lake Huron to the Flint River. Common sources that may lead to lead poisoning is paint, diet, drinking water, pets, and toys. According to Edwards, lead-based paint is often sweet tasting. Edwards further states that children and pets can pick and lick paint. Furthermore, during renovation, lead-based paint becomes toxic dust. Through our diet, lead can be ingested. Plants can absorb soil-based lead. Food cans can have lead solder as well. It is especially important to properly dispose vacuum cleaner dust. Compost is typically used in vegetable plots. Therefore, vacuum cleaner dust should not be placed in the compost bins. According to Brown and Margolis, lead exposure through a water source is unlikely unless contamination occurs. The most common exposure to lead is through airborne lead and deteriorating lead paint. So while lead exposure through a water source is rare, this incident occurred exposing an entire city to lead poisoning. Pets, cats more specifically, can ingest lead during grooming and also pollute beds and furniture with the lead that may be on their fur. Lead soldered joints and pipes can leach. Therefore, the use of hot water with lead pipes should be avoided as often as possible. Cold water for drinking, cooking, and making infant formula is recommended. Families should consider the use of contaminated water, especially when preparing foods such as rice and pasta, which will absorb lead and other contaminants. Steps to reduce lead in the water is by flushing pipes prior to use, using cold water for cooking and drinking, and utilizing water filters. Lead in drinking water is different from lead from other sources, as it disproportionately affects developmentally vulnerable children and pregnant mothers. Children can absorb 40% to 50% of an oral dose of water soluble lead, compared with 3% to 10% for adults. The next slide will automatically begin, and on that slide it is a brief commercial about the residents in the city of Flint and how the water crisis has affected them thus far. I know that the presidential election is over, and I am sure everyone is happy about that. It is a commercial that was for Hillary Clinton, but Irregardless of the presidential election, I just thought that the commercial overall would be beneficial for my topic. Please click the link to be directed to the commercial. I attempted to embed the commercial into this presentation. However, upon final uploading of the PowerPoint to YouTube, I discovered that it would not play automatically. I apologize for the inconvenience. Thank you. Exposure to lead in children can have profound effects, even if the lead exposure is a low level. Due to lead exposure through a water source being rare, it continues to occur, such as the ongoing incident in Flint, Michigan. The cover of Time magazine is of a child in Flint, and the article reports the water crisis that the city is experiencing. Flint, Michigan, and surrounding areas in Genesee County is considered the Greater Flint area. To develop a desire to reduce the risk, being able to recognize the predictors of exposure is important. Children in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods or urban areas are at a higher risk for exposure. Greater Flint is a post-industrial region of nearly 500,000 people struggling from years of disinvestment by the automotive industry and associated manufacturing activities. The region has lost 77% of its manufacturing employment and 41% of employment overall since 1980. National and local data sources demonstrate dismissal indicators for children, especially within Flint city limits. Greater Flint ranks towards the bottom of the state in rates of childhood poverty, 42% in Flint versus 16.2% in Michigan and 14.8% in the United States. Unemployment, violent crime, illicit drug use, domestic violence, premature births, infant mortality, and overall health outcomes. Children are more at risk to develop lead poisoning due to inserting their hands into their mouths, exposure from pica, a less developed blood-brain barrier, iron deficiency anemia, and increased lead absorption. Water-soluble lead absorption is 4 to 5 times higher in children. Lead exposure can lead to developmental and behavioral problems, aggression, and hyperactivity. Lead poisoning in children under 6 affects the brain, bones, and kidneys. The damage is irreversible, and it may also include the nervous system and hearing loss. In the United States, African American children have a greater risk of contracting lead poisoning than any other race and ethnicities. Early education, frequent monitoring of a child's development, as well as good nutrition are ways to eliminate the effects of lead poisoning. While prevention is the best option, consumption of plant-based foods can contest lead poisoning. According to the Committee on Environmental Health, to increase renal excretion, the intake of foods high in calcium, vitamin C, and iron is beneficial. I currently am doing my field work with a Head Start program in Genesee County. Through the program, the schools are able to provide children with breakfast, a morning snack, lunch, and an evening snack. The foods listed are always included with the meals. Something that I learned through working with the Head Start program was that chocolate also was a good food to feed to assist in reversing the effects of lead poisoning. Despite efforts to decrease childhood lead exposure, it continues to occur in the United States and worldwide. Parents need to keep in mind that even low levels of lead may result in neurodevelopment in children. I believe that is why Genesee County has had such a federal push to ensure that early Head Start was in place for the area children. They're able to be tested more often. They're able to be provided with the foods to reverse or assist with reversing the effects of the lead poisoning in an effort to try to combat what has occurred in this community. The American Academy of Pediatrics most recently recommended that pediatricians begin to screen children between 12 and 24 months who reside in areas built before 1960. Also, children that receive Medicaid benefits and are foreign-born should be considered for early screens. The issue that I see with this recommendation, especially in light of the Flint water crisis, is that the lead exposure occurred throughout the entire city. So it did not just occur in older homes, but also newly built homes with the same piping throughout the entire city. I think that maybe screening standards should change a bit for cities with older infrastructures so that other communities do not get affected the way that this area has. The crisis has occurred. Now, what action steps can be taken to continue to prevent a crisis like this happening again in the future? The best solution would be to correct the city's infrastructure. However, that will not be a quick fix. To date, I believe that maybe less than 10% of Flint, Michigan's pipes have been repaired, and this has been an issue that has been going on for now almost 3 years. So until that occurs, lead poisoning is still a health issue in this community, which it can be prevented. However, the prevention does not always happen. I think that since the media has left the community, that a lot of the world believes that the issue here has been resolved when in fact it has not. Bottled water is still being used to cook and for people to bathe with because the water levels are still testing very high for lead. The EPA is responsible for guaranteeing safe drinking water. In response to the Flint drinking water crisis, the EPA recently released a memo reiterating and clarifying the need for states to conduct corrosion control reviews before implementing changes. This recommendation is especially relevant for communities with aging infrastructures, city governments, and minimum water supply capacity. In such situations, there is an increased need for state and federal expertise and oversight to support decisions to protect population health. Once the government system fails, parents and community resources have to work collectively in the best interest of the children. While the effects of lead poisoning may not be reversible, through diligent efforts, the effects can be reduced. In regards to the nutritional tips already mentioned, calcium is a key component on combating lead. Supplements, counseling, and exposure prevention are all critical once lead poisoning has occurred. Children exposed to lead are not a lost cause, long as steps to combat the effects are taken seriously and done immediately after the exposure occurs. Lead isn't good for anyone's health and is especially bad for small children and pregnant women. Keep your family lead safe by avoiding contact with it. If you are concerned about contaminated water, the use of an NSF certified filter or bottled water for drinking, cooking, and mixing baby formula may be required. If using a filter, make sure to change the filter cartridge by the date printed on the package. Any additional concerns about your child's diet should be directed to your pediatrician. This concludes my presentation on the effects, risk, and reduction of lead exposure through water. I've had an interesting time with the research, but also an enjoyable experience through my field work and with the early Head Start program in Genesee County. I just want to keep this issue in the forefront because I think that many people have forgotten about it, but it is still an ongoing issue here in this community and for our children, which are our future. Thank you again.